Welcome to Latte with a Lawyer, a podcast dedicated to bringing you the stories of some of America's most successful lawyers, figuring out what makes them tick, how they creatively solve problems, and how others aspiring to be them can follow in their footsteps. Here's your host, Jacob Wells.
Hey, Spencer, thanks so much for coming on the show. Before we get into everything, I just wanted to have our audience get a little bit of an overview of who you are for those of our viewers who don't know.
Sure. So my name is Spencer Kuvin. I'm an attorney practicing in the West Palm Beach area. I've been doing this now for about 26 years. Started my practice down in Miami and moved up to West Palm Beach about 20 years ago. I do strictly personal injury litigation with an emphasis on particular types of cases. So I represent sexual assault victims in certain cases, but I also handle complex medical negligence nursing home cases as well.
Gotcha. And I have to ask, since our show is called Latte with a Lawyer, what's your preferred beverage of choice in the morning? What gets you going for your busy day ahead?
I'm a cafe Americano. I go with a straight cup of coffee, a little cream, a little sugar, and I'm good to go.
Great. So when I looked you up, I came across a nickname that you had in college, the Vampire. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Where'd you find that? Yeah, you definitely.
I think it was on Wikipedia, and then I saw that you were a DJ in school, and I tied the two together.
Yeah. So yeah, back in college, before I ever went to law school, I worked as a disc jockey at a radio station. So whenever you work for a radio station, especially in college, you get the worst shift when you first start out. So my initial shift on radio was from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning, 3 days a week.
Wow.
So I would be sleeping all day and up all night. So my friends just kind of started referring to me as the vampire because I was up all night long and sleep during the day. So after a while, I got transferred to my own show on the station, which was a heavy metal show at the time. So I figured what better on-air name than the Vampire, which was what everybody was calling me anyway.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was wondering that. That makes so much sense. So how did you transition from being a DJ, your love of music, to representing some of the most famous people in recent cases like Jeffrey Epstein, Tiger Woods, Bill Cosby? How did you transition?
So I started my career wanting to really work for the record industry because that was kind of what my background was. I had never really had a very strong interest at first to go into the law. I was more interested in the music industry. So going to law school was just really kind of the next step in working my way into the music industry. But while in law school, I found I had a certain affinity for what we call tort cases, which are personal injury anytime when someone's injured in a civil kind of context. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the different areas and fields and learning it, and especially the medicine and personal injury and the like. And then when I got out of law school, my first few jobs were kind of focused in that field, and eventually it developed. At some point, I transferred up to West Palm Beach. And when I moved up from Miami to West Palm Beach, I started working for a lawyer here in the West Palm Beach area by the name of Bob Montgomery. He's since passed away, but he was kind of the godfather of attorneys here in the Palm Beach area. And he had represented some very famous people. And as a result, working with him, I got a chance to kind of work my way into representing a number of people. And the first famous client I can remember representing was Burt Reynolds here in West Palm Beach. Bob Montgomery came in my office one day and dropped a file on my desk and said, "Here, you deal with this." And it was Burt Reynolds split up with his girlfriend at the time, the girl he had cheated on Lonnie Anderson with, and it was a big, mess and publicity and all that kind of stuff. So I got my first taste of it back then.
Wow. So I got to ask you about the Jeffrey Epstein case, just because I grew up in South Florida as well, and watching the documentary Filthy Rich really hits home, having gone to school in West Palm Beach and seeing, just initially knowing about him, that being the tip of the iceberg. And I think they make the metaphor in the show of him being just the tip of the iceberg, but really opening up my eyes to that whole case and it all taking place in Palm Beach. I would love if you could go into what it was like working for those victims. And, that's just got to be extremely fulfilling to help out those people that he preyed on that were really marginalized. And if you could just go into that a little bit.
Yeah, it was definitely a humbling experience. And at the time you're caught up in it, you don't realize it until you really kind of look back on that experience as to, what you've been through and what it really truly meant. As far as the entire story and experience, there literally have been books written on the case. So it could take me hours and hours to go through everything. But from a highlight perspective, it all started with one young girl who walked into my office in my law firm at the time and told me an incredible story, me and my law partner back then, about some rich guy on Palm Beach Island who had paid her to do some unspeakable things. And she was still only 15 years old at the time and a student in a local high school, Royal Palm Beach High School.
Wow.
And it was really kind of from the genesis of that original story she had to tell us, to then the criminal investigation, to then a broader investigation by the police department, to then expanding into a federal investigation, to then expanding into civil lawsuits, and then a multitude of victims eventually coming forward and being able to represent a number of them throughout that process.
Right. So I guess furthermore, I'm a little bit curious what your thoughts were on the documentary. I know that they tried to paint certain people like Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, as being affiliated and having gone to the island. And I know that you have some theories as well, because you actually, didn't you kind of predict that Jeffrey Epstein was going to be killed in jail? So curious a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, yes, there were a lot of people that were connected to Epstein back at the beginning of the cases. And these, remember, there were really kind of two phases to this whole case. There was the case that was going on back when it originally was brought in 2006, 2007. And that's when everything really kind of started coming to light.
Right.
After a number of years, those cases resolved. The criminal case and the civil cases kind of quieted down, everything resolved. And it was really dormant for about 10 to 11 years until really it kind of came back up again through the Miami Herald story and then ultimately Netflix documentary and all of that.
Right.
Netflix did a really good job of really kind of going through a lot of information in as brief a format as they possibly could. And they did get through a lot of what really occurred and the flavor and feel of kind of what happened at the time. There's always things they're going to miss because it's a short documentary format. And until you actually, see the entire thing on paper in a book or in a long story format, it's really kind of hard to condense. But they did a very good job. As far as the, really powerful people that were connected to Epstein, it's important to understand, this was a man that was friendly with dignitaries, royalty, politicians around the world, literally around the globe. So he was socializing with the likes of, obviously, Bill Clinton. He was socializing and flying around in his jet with comedians, well-known named comedians that are still out there, magicians, well-known named magicians, politicians that everybody knows, and names like you mentioned, as well as others.
Donald Trump, right?
I mean, he's been connected to going to parties with Trump and events with Clinton and obviously he was working closely with Harvard and MIT and their boards on donations and meetings and scholars at those institutions. Prince Andrew, everybody knows about his affiliations with Prince Andrew and the visits that Prince Andrew had to the island and to his home. It's just an amazing web of people that were really involved in his life. Now, having said that, it's really unclear, and it never was absolutely certain to what extent all of those individuals had an awareness of what he was doing with these young girls. And there was certainly no hard evidence that we could point to that implicated any of these other people in any of these acts, except for some of the allegations that you did hear in the documentary, obviously by one of the victims. Having said that, and I've always gone on record with this, once he was convicted back in 2006, 2007, as a pedophile, someone who had abused young girls, and the news was out about what he was like, anyone who was affiliated with him after that point in time, I question their morals at the end of the day. Because who really wants to affiliate themselves with someone like that? This is a man who was accused of abusing more than 40 underage girls by the FBI, 40 plus young girls. And then you're going to affiliate yourself with someone like that and ask for donations for that person and go to parties and events with that person like nothing had happened whatsoever. It's just bad judgment. As far as his, death in jail, I'm on record as to how I feel about that circumstance, and obviously the massive coincidences that would have to occur to believe the story that's been put out there as far as him committing suicide on his own. But the reality is, look, it's only one of two things. Either it was a massive failure on the part of the Department of Justice. I mean, massive. Guards going to sleep, cameras malfunctioning, cameras that were working, the tapes are missing. Having all kinds of devices in his cell to be able to do anything like that, like cords and ropes and sheets and pills and all kinds of stuff in his cell. Pulling the guard or pulling his cellmate just a few days before this, taking him off suicide watch just a few days before it happens. Either that was a just massive failure by the Department of Justice, or the story we're not hearing is accurate and something else.
Wow.
But we may never actually hear the truth. We may never hear the full story about what actually occurred at the end of the day.
Interesting. So going off of that and currently and where the case stands, I guess maybe, is there anything you want to say about Ghislaine Maxwell and what is going to happen with her, or anything that's still ongoing that hasn't been resolved?
So we know that she was set for trial. It was supposed to take place in July, but it just got continued by the court and by the agreement of the attorneys involved in the case. So hopefully her case will go to trial this year in 2021. It may end up in the fall or late summer going to trial. My guess is, though, and my prediction, much like the one I had with Jeffrey Epstein, is that she's going to cut a deal. That it might go up until the eve of trial, but at the end of the day, I don't think she wants to see the inside of a courtroom, and I don't think she wants the world to see the information that the U.S. Attorney's Office has gathered about what she has done as part of this conspiracy with Epstein to abuse all of these young girls. I mean, she really acted as the madam of that house. I mean, she was, I represent now victims that had direct contact with Ghislaine Maxwell, who can tell a story about the organizational efforts and how Ghislaine really organized what was going on in the home and telling the girls where to go, who to see, what to do, how to act, all of those things, knowing exactly what Epstein was, who he was, what he was doing to these young girls. So for her to profess innocence, and I've seen that there's a website put up by her brother, it's really just insulting to a lot of the victims. And for her to sit back, I also read stories about her crying in jail about how awful the conditions are. I can tell you on behalf of the victims I represent, their answer to that is good. She deserves everything she gets.
Right. Yeah, the amount of evidence and the amount of people, like you said, the amount of victims, it's just, it's not one person coming out, it's multiple. So pretty wild. Besides for those cases, is there any case that you're extremely proud of that really stands out as being a major success in your career?
So I did also represent one of the victims of Bill Cosby. And during that representation, it was a very hard fought battle for this young girl. She was one of the youngest victims that had come forward in the massive victims that came forward in the years that all of that information came out about Mr. Cosby. And during that fight out in California, we were able to not only get past various different hurdles that both Bill Cosby as well as Hugh Hefner and the Hefner organization put up because she was abused at the mansion in California. But ultimately,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we were ultimately able to get the deposition set of Bill Cosby in jail. This was after he was convicted and after he was behind bars. And his deposition was set to go forward. And it was on the eve of that deposition going forward in Philadelphia that I was able to negotiate a very favorable resolution for my client who had been abused. And like I said, she was one of the only ones that it was able to ultimately get some kind of financial compensation out of Mr. Cosby.
So after getting the financial compensation and just from watching the documentary on Jeffrey Epstein, it seems like, first of all, he chose marginalized, abused people to begin with to go after. So I'm curious, once they get the financial reward, is their future, does it look positive? Are they able to get help? Because it seemed kind of depressing to watch that these people were really taken advantage of and had all these mental health, drug abuse issues. Is there any positive outcome in any of these cases, in the Bill Cosby case, maybe?
There are, obviously there are success stories and sometimes there are not so happy stories. But you're right. I mean, ultimately he preyed on the weakest victims he could find in Palm Beach. And really, I've categorized him as a hunter. In the wild, lions, tigers, they go after the weak because they're the easiest prey. And that's exactly what he was doing. That's exactly what Ghislaine were doing. They were hunting. They would go out on the streets. They would send their, girls to bars, clubs, schools, and they would hunt for the weakest victims they could find. And then they would bring them to the house. So unfortunately, when you abuse someone who's already in a position where they've either been abused before, or they're coming from an abusive home, or they're coming from an alcoholic home, or a home where their parents just aren't around most of the time, those are the weakest victims. And unfortunately, the stories sometimes don't play out as good as you would hope. Having said that, for some of the minor victims, we were able to set up what are called annuities. And those annuities were protected funds that wouldn't pay out until later on when they became of age of majority or even into their 20s. So for a lot of those victims, they still have funds available that they can use for therapy, for purchasing their first home, possibly for, different things that, these are things that hopefully they won't alleviate and get rid of what's happened to them in the past, but at least it gives them some measure of justice from a financial perspective of what they've been through.
No, that's great. I guess going in a little bit of a different direction, I'm curious if you have any advice for anybody who's interested in law and wants to follow the path to become a lawyer, somebody young in college who's aspiring to go that direction.
Sure. I think what I would tell anyone that's in college at this point is, look, I didn't have a straight law path. In other words, I wasn't the kid that came out of high school and said, I want to be a lawyer and that's what I want to do. And I didn't take pre-law classes in high school. And I didn't even take any law classes in college for that matter. My graduate
Wow.
degree in college was an economics major with a communications minor. So my whole perspective on life really gave me kind of um, a broader field of view for the practice of law, I think.
Hmm.
And I would recommend to anybody that wants to get into the field of at least trial law or litigation, uh, I definitely think that you need to have some communications in your background. You know, my background was in talking on the radio, so I kind of found my voice that way. But acting and communicating and speech and all of
Hmm.
those types of things in communications, um, I think are very integral if you want to be a litigator, because you're
Right.
going to be talking a lot. And the reality is you're going to be reading a lot. You know, law school is a lot of reading. You're reading case law, you're reading books and treatises and all kinds of information, whether it's medicine or all kinds of stuff. So make sure that you like to read, because I would say probably close to 60 to 70% of my job is reading most of the time.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I would encourage anyone that wants to pursue this kind of career to get a broad perspective on life, get a broad
Hmm.
perspective on every field that you can think of. I mean, look, when I litigate a case, if it's a crane malfunction or failure that injured somebody, I have to know not only personal injury and the injuries that my client suffered and the difference between a femur and a tibia and a fibia and a vertebrae, but I
Hmm.
also got to know engineering. You know, what's a pivot
Yeah.
point on the crane, and what does that mechanism do, and what does that pulley do, and what do those hydraulics do? So I'm constantly learning. And then if it's a medical malpractice, I've got to know heart surgery just as well as the surgeon does, so that I can understand what questions to ask. Or I've got to know cancer diagnosis just as well as the oncologist to be able to ask those questions. But
Right.
it's, you know, you're constantly learning. So if you want to do this for a living, if you want to be a lawyer, you've got to have a desire to thrive for
Hmm.
knowledge and always want to be learning.
That's really interesting. I never heard anybody mention the different things that you learn on the different cases. I think to draw a comparison, I think of actors that get into different roles and
Yes,
they'll do method acting and work as a taxi driver or something. So that's really interesting that you're able to delve into those different areas and really learn a lot about each individual component there. Um,
absolutely.
Also, you said that 60 to 70% of your job is reading. So I got to ask you, is there any book, if you had to take one book to the office tomorrow, whether it be about law or just anything in general, what's that book?
Wow. I'm in a phase in my career now that I really am interested in learning the business of law.
Hmm.
So there's an amazing book out there that's called Traction by Gino Wickman. And it's a fantastic book that really teaches you business. And it's something that they don't even teach you in law school. You know, this is
Hmm.
how to run a business effectively and profitably. And it's amazing some of the things you can learn from some of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world. And don't forget, you know, while people may want to go to law school and become lawyers, if you don't have clients coming in the door, you're not working.
Right.
So
Right.
as smart as you may be, you could be the smartest guy in the law school and you could be valedictorian in your law school class. But if you can't market and get clients, then you're going to always be dependent upon some other law firm that's employing you. And the one good thing
Hmm.
about the law is you can hang your own shingle any day of the week. You could go out and start your own law firm and you're now a business owner. And congratulations, here's the keys to your office. And you know, how are you going to get clients now? How are you going to pay the light bill? And how are you going to pay the rent? And how are you going to pay the secretary? These are the kind of things they don't teach you in law school.
Hmm.
So business books are really going to be integral if you want to be an entrepreneur and you really want to start your own law firm. So this book,
Right.
Traction, I found is a really an amazing book. Even, you know, halfway through my career now, I'm learning things that I wish I would have learned 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that you brought it up like 25 minutes in the conversation because thinking about law, I think that it's really important to differentiate somebody like you that's really passionate about what they do first and foremost, and then the business side of things is secondarily. Um, how do you differentiate yourself from the lawyer that's just trying to get somebody in the door and just trying to make money? Or is it just from your experience, your character, people can just tell that right off the bat?
It's tough. Obviously, there are things that you learn along the way in order to be able to market yourself, to be able to get out there so that people know that you're passionate about what you do and that you know what you're doing in the field that you're practicing in. But that's just as important as being a specialist in your field. So,
Mm-hmm.
as much as you learn in law school and as much and as hard as you read the cases and practice and have your successes in trials or verdicts or whatever it may be, you have to make sure that the people that are out there, the world of potential clients, know about who you are and what you do. And if you don't, then you don't have a job. I mean, you've got to make sure that people know that you're good at what you do. It's really a career no different than a plumber or a doctor or a general contractor. I mean, you could be the best general contractor and build the most amazing homes in the world, but if nobody knows who you are, you're not going to get jobs. So,
Right.
yes, learning the law is first, and you
Mm-hmm.
got to be good at that, because if you're not good at that, then everything else fails. But that's not it, and that's only one piece of the puzzle. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
also be good at business if you want to really make a career out of it and be an entrepreneur and be successful.
Right. So now in the 21st century, we have a lot of technologies coming out, whether it be AI or document management softwares. And our show is actually sponsored by a tech company as well, Emotion Track. I was just wondering what you think the future of the legal industry is.
I can tell you that over the last year with COVID, there are lawyers that have been practicing probably 40 plus years that I thought would never adopt technology that
Mm-hmm.
I've seen now on Zoom hearings and Zoom depositions. And it's really kind of great. They had to be dragged, literally kicking and screaming during a pandemic in order to adopt the technology, but they're doing
Yeah.
it. And I really do see that the future of law is really going to be a transition to probably a more virtual experience for a lot of the process, from client meetings, initial meetings, discovery meetings with clients, depositions, even possibly trials. But there's
Mm-hmm.
going to still be a certain person-to-person component that I think will have to take place in some circumstances. But I
Right.
think it's not going to be the only option anymore. I think that now everybody's going to have to rethink what options they want to have. And, look, as the future even grows, I could foresee virtual trials, where you have jurors that are wearing VR headsets and they can
Wow.
go to the scene of a crash, or they can go to the scene of an accident, or I could have an accident reconstructionist graphically recreate the scene, and then they can see it in real time in a VR headset, along with the judge and everybody else that I give the VR headset to. I mean, that would be
Right.
an amazing thing. It would put them literally, let's say, in the driver's seat during a car crash, right? How better to really understand what a client has been through, if not right there, experience
Mm-hmm.
it themselves. So, it's an amazing time. And I think that we're going to make huge leaps and bounds toward use of more technology, not less. And,
Right.
older people that are pushing back, I think, are going to be pushed to the side if they don't adopt.
Oh, interesting. That's exciting to hear. Is there anything else you want to discuss or bring up? Anything you want people listening to know before we wrap up?
No, I think really just that at the end of the day, I went to law school with people that were just coming out of college, as well as people that had completely different careers before they went back to law school. I can remember my valedictorian in my law school class had two young boys that were 3 and 5 years old. So she was a mother first, and then went back to law school after her boys were old enough to start going to school. So I would say, don't ever give up, and don't ever think it's too late. And if it's really a passion that you want to explore, and it's something you want to, truly want to be, that there's always room for another good lawyer. Alternatively, if it's just something that you're doing to, because you don't have a job and heck, I might as well try law school, there's too many of those out there. And it's not going to be a good career path for someone like that. Right. But if you're going to be amazing and you want to be amazing and you really want to, thrive at what you're doing and you really have a passion for it, then the field of law is fantastic, and it really has no boundaries.
Great. And if anybody wants to reach out to you or find you on the web, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. They can reach me via email at skuvin@800goldlaw.com. They can also check out my Twitter feed at SKLaw. That's on Twitter. Or they can go to my website at my law firm, which is 800 Gold Law. And they can see kind of what I've done. Or like you did, you can just Google me. And I'm all over the internet.
All right. If our listeners have enjoyed what they've heard from you today, you know where to find him. So thanks so much, Spencer. I really appreciate you taking in the time. And
Jacob, thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much. Bye.